We're here, it's Sunday, 24th of August, and we're talking about lookalikes or duplicates, as in Putin and Biden. And yeah, I'd be interested to hear about this, Tim.
Yeah, apparently Putin has been replaced by a double, and so the one that we're seeing in public now is not the real original Vladimir Putin. It's interesting that no one cares and no one's mentioning this. I mean, people care more about the replacement of pop star in 1966, Paul McCartney. They've been talking about that ever since it happened in 1966. No one can shut up about it. Does anyone talk about Putin being replaced or the fact that Biden was replaced? And for 12 years between 2013 and 2025, no one in the world mentioned, talked about, or gave a shit about the fact that Joe Biden had been replaced by British actor Struan Roger. And now the same has happened to Putin, and no one's talking about it except us. But then I'm not surprised, because I find that most times that I blow the whistle on something important, everyone's asleep and they don't wake up even after I tell them. All right. So yeah, replacements have been happening for a very, very long time, and people just seem unaware of it. I remember David Icke talking about how Saddam Hussein, though he appeared to be meeting with his troops and inspecting his troops, it wasn't him, it was his double. And he said this on the Terry Wogan show, and Wogan, the thick bastard, tried to make him look stupid and crazy and tried to get the audience to laugh at him. And David Icke said, yeah, okay, well, what can I say? 2,000 years ago, a man made some pretty extraordinary claims, and people laughed at him and ignored him and ridiculed him too. Then you could hear a pin drop in the, studio because he was right and they knew it. Anyway. All right, so let's move on to the topic that Patrick Carroll brought up about the Chabads. World War III will kill Satan deniers. So basically, at the time the Antichrist takes power, we will be obliged to accept the Antichrist, and if you don't, off with your head. Apparently, Andy, there are guillotines in the FEMA camps in the United States, and that in 8 days they can accomplish their mission of genociding all Christians in the United States. I mean, that is millions of people, but they can do it because of the way these machines work. They're so efficient. So either you deny Christ or off with your head.
Oh, I'm
Nice,
keeping
huh?
it there. I like to keep my head.
And he's gone off the air because he's hiding his head. He doesn't want to lose it. That's good. Okay. Yeah. Chabad are still controlling all sides in the lead up to World War III. The sole preoccupation of all so-called holy, inverted commas, rabbis for over 1,500 years, since the founding of Judaism in 500 AD, has been to wipe out Christianity and to genocide Christ's people. And just to give you an idea of how much control they have, they're trying to date differently by saying instead of 500 AD, they want 500 ACE, after the Common Era, because they cannot stand any reference to Christ, to Jesus Christ. Okay, could it actually be that the Shabbat is fixing to sacrifice the innocent Jews of Israel? Can we even put that past them? Is that what they mean by the redemption of Israel? All right, so Shabbat is still controlling all sides of World War III. At any rate, it seems clear that the one of the next steps the Shabbat is planning is the total destruction of the West. In the USA, two Shabbat Zio-fascists control the U.S. White House. The Shabbat members Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. While Trump is also the Shabbat's currently designated Gentile preparatory Antichrist, whereas Netanyahu is the Jewish preparatory Antichrist. So the Shabbat has announced. The Shabbat has induced Trump to launch a trade war through tariffs that cut the USA off from strategic rare earth metals, most military equipment, 80% of badly needed medical supplies, etc. This could induce a collapse of a multiple supply chain network after a tripling in fuel costs, or even worse scenarios than this. In Europe, the Shabbat has powerful influence over today's far-left communist regimes in Britain, France, Germany, Poland, etc., most of which are controlled indirectly by the Shabbat, but directly by the Talmudic super lodges. These regimes agreed to bankrupt Europe for the holy cause of financing World War III. Iran, the Shabbat has control and influence over much of the Freemason-controlled Islamic regime of Iran. Gul Magaldi revealed that the Talmudic super lodge Hathor Pentalpha has as its members no fewer than 6 famous Iranian Muslims who were in fact senior Freemasons and therefore Satanists. Muslim cleric Haydar Mazliah, who served as Iran's Minister of Intelligence from 2009 to 2013. Muslim cleric Mahmoud Alavi, who served as Iran's Minister of Intelligence from 2013 to 2021. Muslim cleric Mohammed Momen, who served as a member of Iran's Guardian Council from 1983 to 2019. Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, president of Iran in 1989 to 1997. His deputies must have been Freemasons too. Islamic jurist Gholam Hossein Moshini Ajia, conservative puppetician and chief justice of Iran. Volaleya Saif, governor of the Central Bank of Iran. In Russia, Chabad member Vladimir Putin controls Russia's Kremlin and its highly advanced missiles. This would probably be the replacement Putin, not the original Vladimir Putin. The handler of Chabad member Vladimir Putin is the holy inverted commas Chabad Rabbi Beryl Lazar. Worse still, Putin is a member of Talmudic super lodge Golden Eurasia and also a member of the World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Ukraine, Chabad member Volodymyr Zelensky is losing, but plans to keep up pretenses a while longer. In Turkey, President Recep Erdogan is under indirect Chabad control because he is a member of the Talmudic super lodge Hathor Pentalpha. In North Korea, controlled by the Holy Chabad, holy inverted commas, of course, Rabbi Meir Alfasi. Originally and starting in 1945, North Korea was placed under the Chabad yoke by Russian Jewish advisors Grigory Mekler and Zinovy Mekler. In India, the Chabad House of Mumbai, built in 2002 by the Holy Rabbi Graviel Noach Holtzberg and wife Rivka. In Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region, safe in the hands of the holy, inverted commas, Chabad Rabbi Jacob Israel Herzog. Israel, the Chabad member Netanyahu is the Chabad's incumbent, officially appointed Jewish preparatory Antichrist, whom the holy inverted commas Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson appointed in 1990 with the sole purpose of bringing the final Antichrist. The Chabad officially stated that the final Antichrist is set to take over from Netanyahu and must be installed in the temple, the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, at or before the 2nd of October 2027, the end of the Hebrew year 5787. All of these Chabad puppets and more are eagerly awaiting their orders to carry out the next steps of the Chabad engineered World War III, and it seems clear that the Chabad intends the U.S. to lose World War III. The three-part war of Gog and Magog. The foremost Chabad goal behind World War III is the genocide of over 2 billion Christians. The Chabad wants World War III to resume the Christian Holocaust, which so far only genocided 150 million Christians in World War I and World War II. Oh dear. Only 150 million. Oh gosh. You can do better than that, Chabad. Let's try 2 billion Christians. The Chabad refers to the Christian Holocaust as a three-part war of Gog and Magog. Its past masters, the holy, inverted commas, of course, Rabbi Shalom Dovber Schneerson led the Chabad from 1892 to 1920 and helped to orchestrate World War I for the genocide of 65 million Christians. Again, the holy, inverted commas, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson led the Chabad from 1920 to 1950 and helped to orchestrate World War II for the genocide of 85 million Christians. Geez, that's combine those figures, 85 and 65, you got quite a total there. But nothing compared to what they intend for World War III, the genocide of 2 billion Christians worldwide. The Holy Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson led the Chabad from 1951 to 94 and helped to plan World War III until 1994 with the intention of genociding over 2 billion Christians, which is the Chabad's foremost goal. The Chabad is a Gnostic, dualist, Luciferian doomsday sect, having about 95,000 official members, but the support of over 60% of world Jewry. Scary, huh?
Very.
The The Albert Pike Plan, in broad brush terms, the Albert Pike Plan is in plain view today. It is what we can clearly see around us, the political Zionists versus the leaders of the Islamic world, with the Antichrist state of Israel in the middle. There's an interesting map that you could share with the listeners, Andy, and it shows the map of the Ezekiel prophecy, the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel for the launch of World War III, which the powerful Chabad is using. So the different names mentioned in Ezekiel: Rosh for Russia, Meshech, Tubal for Moscow and Tobolsk, the former capital of Siberia, Persia for Iran, Cush for Ethiopia and Sudan, Put for Libya and Algeria, Gomer for Turkey, Beth Togarmah would be the satellite states of the former Soviet Union. Okay. There are multiple versions of this because the sole preoccupation of all the so-called holy rabbis for the last 1500 years since the founding of Judaism in 500 AD has been to wipe out Christianity and to genocide Christians, all Christians. But Catholic and Orthodox prophecies spell doom for the Antichrist state of Israel. However, the Chabad may yet be foiled because both Catholic and Orthodox prophecies say that the third bowl of God's wrath mentioned in the book of Revelation is reserved for obliterating the Antichrist state of Israel. In Revelation 16, verse 6, the third angel of God's wrath explicitly references the Jews, stating, "For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink, for it is their just due." The reason is because the Jews are the enemies of mankind. In Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15, St. Paul confirms, "Who both killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and have persecuted us, and please not God, and are adversaries to all men." Okay, so they keep talking about anyone saying anything against Jews as anti-Semites. It's a misnomer. Most of the Israelis are not Semitic. They're not Semites. There is no Semitic ancestry in 80% of Israelis. So the whole name anti-Semite is a misnomer. Russia, which is Magog, will invade the Antichrist state of Israel. Catholic prophecy amplifies Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 78, by confirming Russia as Magog assailing Israel. There, Ezekiel himself addresses the commander Gog of the forces of Russia, Magog, and urges him, "Prepare and make yourself and all the multitude assembled about you ready, and be commander over them. You will be called to arms." In this Gog and Magog operation by Russia and its leader, 2/3 of Israel will perish, according to Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8 and 9. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left. I will bring the 1/3 through the fire, will refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, this is my people, and each one will say, the Lord is my God. 1/3 of Israelis will be purified to become Christians, and thus people of God. So 2/3 of Israelis are set to perish after Russia, Magog, invades the Antichrist state of Israel. This may indicate that Russia will put the 6 million Japhetic Euro Jews of modern Israel to the sword and convert the remaining 3 million Arab Semites to Christianity. Or it may indicate that Russia will be able to convert, be that person a Japhetic Euro or an Arabic Semitic inhabitant of the Antichrist state of Israel. They will be able to convert the throng to Christianity. It's interesting, Andy?
2 billion people are a lot of people.
Indeed.
So isn't there any better way of doing it than doing it so obviously?
Mm-hmm. I remember reading a book called The Temple and the Lodge, and in that book it detailed how in the U.S. Civil War between the North and the South, in that Civil War, the commanders, the chiefs of the military would meet in the Masonic lodges and would actually plan the next battle, and it would be determined how many casualties there would be, where the battle would take place, and all particulars related to each battle were already pre-planned in the lodges before each battle. Now, Patrick O'Carroll has written an article about how Freemasons engineered the U.S. Civil War. Okay, so as Rothschild Freemasonry orchestrates the Third Masonic Jewish World War, remember they also engineered the U.S. Civil War. Wars served the purpose of destroying Christian civilization, killing Goyim, and consolidating power and wealth in the hands of the Masonic Jewish bankers and their Masonic minions. 700,000 Americans died in the early Goyim depopulation program. In the U.S. Civil War, the Rothschilds hoped to divide America into two factions. The 14th Amendment, adopted on July 9, 1868, transformed all Americans, whether black or white, from sovereigns to subjects, meaning slaves or tax cattle. Recently, Donald Trump made the erroneous statement that Abe Lincoln could have prevented the American Civil War if only he had negotiated. Either that's a naive claim or a deliberate falsehood. It's nonsense because it shows a complete ignorance or a complete misunderstanding of what the real causes of the war actually were. The main reasons for the American Civil War are outlined by Patrick O'Carroll. The recolonization of the USA by Britain. This largely succeeded, although the USA was not thoroughly recolonized until 1913. That was the year that the Federal Reserve Banking Bill was enacted, creating the Federal Reserve Bank. When the U.S. Fed was founded as a subsidiary of Rothschild's Bank of England. The partition of the USA into the Northern Union and the Southern Confederacy, which were both to be controlled by the Zionist House of Rothschild. This part of the plan failed, having been foiled largely by the efforts of Abraham Lincoln. So when you look at the Lincoln assassination, Andy, they were performing a musical in the Ford Theater the night that the president was shot, and the name of the musical was My American Cousin, which is code for the fact that he was a cousin of the Rothschilds, and they were planning to kill him in the Ford Theater that night. John Wilkes Booth, the hired assassin, he was able to shoot the president in the back of the head from the balcony box. But the president did not die. The bullet was lodged in his skull, but he did not die until 7:30 a.m. the following morning. I would suggest that it was poisoning that led to his final demise. His wife was led out of the room, and I do think that the poison would have been administered at that point in time, and that's what caused the president to succumb. The final goal is to transform the USA into a slave plantation owned by Zionist Britain. This was finalized in the years 1868 to 1871. Now, the Rothschilds financed both sides, the North and the South. The Rothschilds gave direct financing to the Confederacy and engineered most of the financial and secessionist intrigues in the South. 90% of the Union's financing came from its own tax base, but the Union also got some financing from the London Rothschilds. The Rothschild allied French House of Orleans also gave direct financing to the Union. Other backing. The Confederacy was also financed by the French House of Bourbon and associated legitimists. Russia's Tsar Alexander II gave largely passive support to the Union and sent an unequivocal warning to Britain not to invade the USA in 1863, when he ordered the Russian Navy's Baltic and Pacific fleets to winter in the U.S. ports of New York and San Francisco. For messing up their U.S. plans, the British Rothschilds rewarded Alexander II by assassinating him in St. Petersburg on the 13th of March, 1881, and then rewarded his grandson, Tsar Nicholas II, by stealing all of his wealth, estimated at over $1 trillion today in today's terms, and ostensibly assassinating the Russian royal family. Now, I've done research on the so-called assassination of the Russian royal family, Andy, and I don't believe they were assassinated. I believe that the German government assisted in their escape because the Tsarina was a German princess, and so they would have considered the family German, the children, German royals. And so they rescued them, and they escaped in a sealed boxcar in a train, and they went to a place called Perm, where they were moved from safe house to safe house until they were finally spirited away into hiding. And several of the Romanovs were able to escape the country. And I believe the Tsar remained in hiding for some period of time in Russia. The research into this matter was done by the BBC journalists, Andy Summer and his colleague, and they wrote a book, I believe co-authored book, The File on the Tsar. Very, very well researched and fascinating book, which I've read, and which is a chapter in my second volume of my book, Shakespeare's Codex, All the World Staged and We Are Merely Played, which I believe will be published this year. The first volume of that book will be published. Okay. Abe Lincoln is also said to have blamed the Catholic Church. In specific terms, he blamed the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church. And I think you will find, if you do some research, that the Chabad is connected to the Jesuit order, and that the black popes, which are also called the generals, rule the Jesuit order, and a succession of these black popes have all been controlled by the Chabad. Originally, I believe the Grand Sanhedrin would have been responsible for the creation of the Jesuits, and the Chabad has now taken over the control. Abraham Lincoln said, "We owe it to the popery that we now see our land redden with the blood of her noble sons." Well, the Jesuit order is the military wing of the Vatican, so he's not wrong. Okay, what did the Rothschilds win? After 1871, full ownership of the U.S. corporation of the Bank of England. Main owners are the Rothschilds and de facto the Windsors. And by the way, the Zionist Rothschild family gained breeding rights in the so-called Windsor family, which is actually the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family, a German royal family. They changed their name to Windsor because it would have been rather impolitic of them to be known as the German royals at a time when England was at war with Prussia in World War I. So the British royal family was bankrupt, and the Rothschilds stepped in with a rescue fund to rescue the Royal British Royals from insolvency. And the deal that was struck was, okay, we saved you. Now we have breeding rights. And so essentially the Windsors are Rothschilds. I think only one of Queen Victoria's brood was actually fathered by her legitimate consort and husband. The other children were all Rothschilds, fathered by a Rothschild. Okay, so a long-awaited opportunity to destroy U.S. Christianity, and that happened particularly after 1919 and culminated in the total mess of loss of moral compass and complete loss of all Christian moral values in the United States that we see today. Andy, we were talking about the issue of replacement doubles earlier, and it's said that George Washington was actually replaced by Adam Weishaupt, the Jesuit that founded the Bavarian Illuminati. And amazingly, the same year, 1776, that the United States was founded as a country. And by the way, the Great Seal of the United States that's found on the backside of the American dollar, that Great Seal is actually the Great Seal of the Bavarian Illuminati, and fittingly so, because the same year that the Bavarian Illuminati was founded is the founding date of the United States, 1776. Ownership of a vassal USA as their lackey to wage all future empire-building wars for the Rothschilds, specifically World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the war in Vietnam, wars for Greater Israel following the Zionist attacks on September 11th, 2001, and the imminent World War III that they have planned. All of these are the goals of the Zionist Rothschilds. Okay. Main outcome. Although the Rothschilds won the U.S. Civil War, they did not succeed in partitioning the USA. The main upshot was that the Bank of England gained ownership of the U.S. corporation in 1871. So it's interesting that the United States is actually the U.S. corporation. The overall death toll was about 750,000. The Zionist Rothschilds and the Zionist English monarchy still own and control the USA today. The 14th Amendment, adopted on July 9th, 1868, transformed all Americans, whether black or white, from sovereigns to subjects, meaning slaves or tax cattle. Hence, real U.S. slavery was in fact launched in 1868, not ended with the Emancipation Declaration, but in fact fully achieved as U.S. slavery in 1868 for all Americans' subjects, no longer considered sovereign citizens, but subjects, tax cattle. And real slavery today is based on a superfluous central bank combined with income tax and national debt, both of them superfluous, all these being scams for wealth transfer from poor to rich and for financing artificial wars and artificial crises. Most wars and all financial crises after 1800 AD. And to fleece, brainwash, and cull the slaves in the process. It would be wrong to view the U.S. Civil War as trivial, since it had truly worldwide implications. Until the era 1861 to 1871, the whole USA was a veritable paradise, akin to an orderly Amish village and populated by sovereigns. That means that if two sovereigns needed to engage in a gunfight, a sheriff had no right to stop them. They could have their duel at their will. The sovereigns had no duties toward any non-existent government. They only needed to follow biblical rules. You know, the 10 Commandments. They adhered to them. It is crucial to observe how great a disaster for all of humanity the Rothschild Zionist victory in the American Civil War was. When the international Zionist bankster orchestrated the American Civil War, in former times, the Rothschilds did not always get their way as they do mostly today. It took them a whole 4 attempts to enslave the USA. The Rothschilds instigated the War of 1812 in a failed attempt to force the renewal of their charter of the First Bank of the United States. In 1938, when U.S. President Andrew Jackson vetoed a charter for the Second Bank of the United States, the Rothschilds sent their manservant, August Belmont, who arrived during the wholly instigated panic of 1837 and made his presence felt by buying up government bonds. His success and prosperity soon led him to the White House, where he became financial advisor to the U.S. president. Okay, in 1857, a pivotal meeting took place in London at which the International Syndicate of Top Banksters decided that the northern and southern U.S. states were to be played off against each other. This 1857 agreement was verified by John Reeves in his authorized biography of 1887 entitled The Rothschilds, the Financial Rulers of Nations, and corroborated by Robert Mackenzie in his 1909 book, The 19th Century, A History. The banksters decided that it would be too complicated to involve France, Britain, Russia, Canada, or even Mexico, so they decided on a civil war that was to be fought over the wholly fake issue of slavery. So, ostensibly, the reason for the U.S. Civil War was the egregious moral crime of slavery and to eradicate it. No, that was just a cover. That was not the true reason for the Civil War. They set up the Lodge Knights of the Golden Circle, the Knights of the Golden Circle, under George W. Bilkley, who is said to have later bragged he had created the fateful War of 1861 by prompting his Knights of the Golden Circle. By the way, John Wilkes Booth was a Knight of the Golden Circle, to launch and push the message of secessionism throughout the southern states. If the South were to win the war, the banksters intended that each state would later secede from the Confederacy and reestablish its own separate central bank under the control of the London House of Rothschild. Finally, the USA's fate as a Rothschild vassal state was sealed when the U.S. Fed was founded in 1913. And let's not forget, Andy, we should revisit the whole issue of the Titanic. On board the Titanic were John Astor, Isidor Straus, and Benjamin Guggenheim. Those men were prevented from boarding lifeboats at the point of a gun. Back off, back off. Women and children first. You're not boarding the lifeboats. They were prevented from boarding. I believe that if proper protocols were followed, they would have had seats on the lifeboats reserved for them because they were very important men representing the national security of the United States, and on those grounds they should have been granted seats aboard lifeboats and found their way to safety. The fact that they were summarily murdered, and by the way, John Astor tried to bribe his way onto a lifeboat and he was shanked to death, stabbed to death by the crew member that he tried to bribe. His body was discovered by Newfoundland fishermen who were involved in the salvage operation, and it was clear that his body was lacerated with wounds, multiple stab wounds, and the story that was hatched to cover this up was that the shrapnel from an exploded chimney on board the ship pierced his body and caused all these shrapnel injuries, which is a fabrication. It's not what happened. Okay. Anyway, they were, those three men, John Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, opponents of the Federal Reserve Banking Bill, which was called the Aldrich Bill, introduced by Senator Aldrich, and they opposed the foundation of the Fed, and one of the aims of the Titanic disaster was to remove these staunch opponents of the Federal Reserve. And so in 1912, April 14th, 1912, the Titanic sank, and 1 year later in 1913, after its opponents had been conveniently removed, the Federal Reserve Bank was founded 1 year after the Titanic disaster. In his 1967 book, Our Crowd, The Great Jewish Families of New York, Stephen Birmingham documents the lives of prominent Jewish families in the New York of the 19th century, but the biggest mafia organizations in the North were the Boston Brahmins, as they were called, and the Essex Junto of Essex County, Massachusetts. Interesting that they call the Eastern establishment elite the Boston Brahmins or the Brahmins. And so the Kennedys would be among these so-called Brahmins. Okay, Jewish influence in the South. During the American Civil War, the main protagonists in the South were the following four Jews: Judah Philip Benjamin, Rothschild agent, slave owner, and puppetician. Benjamin was a brilliant lawyer who became Attorney General, the first advisor to Confederate President Jefferson Davis, the Confederacy's Secretary of War, and its Secretary of State. Benjamin has been dubbed the brains of the revolt. August Belmont, financier and agent of the Frankfurt and Vienna Rothschilds, who changed his name from Schönberg, meaning beauteous mountain, to the more French-sounding Belmont. When you think about it, from an etymology standpoint, Schönberg and Belmont mean exactly the same thing. They are synonyms. They mean beautiful mountain. Okay, so Edwin de Leon, Confederate publicity propaganda manager, who sought the financing in Paris. One financier that paid into the Confederate treasury was the Jewish banking house Erlange et Cie of Paris. Abe Lincoln, half Jew, of the Rothschild Springs Illuminati bloodline. Fritz Springmeier, in his great book called Bloodlines of the Illuminati, has a whole chapter devoted to this information. Utterly fascinating. Lincoln was born of the illicit union of A.A. Springs, real name Springsteen, blood relative of London's Rothschilds, and Nancy Hanks, and yes, a blood relative of the actor Tom Hanks, whom Springs had impregnated in 1808 in Lincolnton, North Carolina, from which they concocted Lincoln's fake surname. Springs left a very large parcel of Alabama land, corresponding to what is known today as Huntsville, Alabama, to his illegitimate son, Abraham Lincoln. In general, Abe Lincoln backed the efforts of his own Springs Rothschild brood to gain control over the South, but that task really took another 60 years. But Lincoln also opposed his own Rothschild family by printing U.S. greenbacks and by preserving the Union. For his disobedience, the Rothschilds rewarded him with a bullet to the back of the head, which was fired by B'nai B'rith puppet John Wilkes Booth. a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which the Chabad had actually established and founded. So B'nai B'rith is said to be the supreme lodge of Freemasonry, the highest lodge of Freemasonry. So at the top, the Sons of the Covenant control Freemasonry. So B'nai B'rith is like the missing capstone at the top of the Great Pyramid that forms Freemasonry. The Knights of the Golden Circle were a B'nai B'rith controlled lodge whose alleged members included Albert Pike, John Wilkes Booth, Jefferson Davis, Jesse James, a famous outlaw, and Samuel Mudd, the physician that treated Booth, thus purportedly giving rise to the phrase, "Your name will be Mudd." Okay. Now, John Wilkes Booth did not die in the tobacco shed fire that took place the day he was ambushed and surrounded. A double died in his place, and not a very good double, because John Wilkes Booth had black hair, and the man who died and whose corpse was examined by those who knew Booth and could identify him, they complained that this Booth had different color hair, red hair. Yeah, so by the way, a man named Finis Bates tracked John Wilkes Booth, found him operating under two different aliases at two different times in his life. One being John St. Helens, and then late in his life changed his name to David George. He was visited upon by a physician who ostensibly used arsenic as an embalming agent and preserved his body so that it mummified. And it was actually John Wilkes Booth's body was on display in circus sideshows for decades following his death. I would say that the Jesuit dispatched physician that oversaw his death administered the arsenic as a poison, which had the after effect of acting as an embalming agent and preserving the assassin's body. Yeah, so Finis Bates was the lawyer that investigated the whole matter of John St. Helens and David George and wrote a book about it, and the findings of that book are included in a chapter on the U.S. presidential assassinations that appears in my book, Shakespeare's Codex, All the World Staged and We Are Merely Played. Okay, Andy, you want to say a few words in summation?
No, you could repeat what you just said. I lost track.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, to be sure. But
it's got something in common though, a little bit, that we're being controlled by people we always have been and
always will be.
If you're very lucky, it won't affect you, but if you're not very lucky, then you might as well just kiss your ass goodbye.
Yeah. What do you think, Andy? Are we lucky?
I don't think we're lucky, but we're avoiding danger.
Yeah. So far, so good, eh?
Yep, so far so good. COVID nearly got us, but well, no, hang on. There was more excess deaths now apparently from the COVID jab than there actually was people who died of COVID itself. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, as always, they have problem, reaction, solution dialectics, and the solution will always lead to more mass death than the original problem. So, yeah.